This conference will now be recorded.
I'm calling to order the August 14th Board of Selectmen meeting. This open meeting of the Town of Auburn Board of Selectmen is being conducted both in person and remotely, consistent with Chapter 107 of the Acts of 2022, which suspend the requirement of all open meeting laws to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of the public bodies are allowed to participate remotely as long as reasonable access is afforded so the public can follow along with the deliberations in the meeting. For the public to join the meeting remotely by telephone, dial 1-408-650-3123 with access code 235-235-861. Or the public can join via computer at global.gotomeeting.com/join/235-235-861. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the town's website. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. Please note that this meeting is being recorded by Auburn Cable Television. Can we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? And then I'll do.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I do believe we have one member of the board joining remotely today, so all votes will be taken as a roll call vote. Members of the board, when I call your name, can you please respond in the affirmative? Dan Carpenter?
Yes.
Steve Chambers?
Here.
Ann Kavanaugh?
Here.
Todd Corain?
Can you ask
Miss-
those who are participating remotely if they can hear us?
Is everybody that's participating remotely, are you able to hear us? Doesn't sound like it.
Todd, we can see that you are participating remotely. Are you able to hear us?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, well, I can't hear you. That's an issue. Let me fix that.
We're having some technical difficulties, if you bear with us for a few moments.
Your mic is clicked off.
Our mic is clicked off? Oh.
I can't read any of them that far.
Can you guys hear us now? Can you hear us now? All right, why don't you-
We were in Yellowstone.
Will you speak into the mic for a second?
There's Todd, like, I hope he's not, okay. Yes. Yeah. I am growing up here. I have a healthy fear of buffalo. I think.
Can you guys hear me?
Can you hear us?
John, can you hear us?
So they're a little more aggressive. So, it was good though. It was super nice
Just chat with these guys and let them know.
from afar. With the telephoto lens, that's how we got to see that. But that was nice. And you're going on vacation soon, right?
Yes.
To Alaska?
Yes.
Where does it go in Alaska?
Juneau, Ketchikan, Stanley, and then I don't know who Prince Rupert is. I'll stop there in British Columbia.
Oh, nice. That'll be fun.
You going to Alaska? That's really cool.
I'm looking forward to it.
Is it a cruise or just flying?
I'm heading to cruise right under the Golden Gate Bridge.
Oh, nice.
Really?
Kind of nice.
That's fun.
And my sister's out there, so I get to see her on her.
Oh, good.
Where is she?
She is 30 miles east of San Francisco.
Very nice.
Yes. Currently mini golfing with her soon-to-be 18-year-old.
Okay. Perfect.
Where did you go on vacation, Steve? You were away, right? Oh, that's nice. In Florida? Oh, it's hot.
Did you
Yeah.
say you went to Disney?
Did you go to Universal?
How
too?
was it? Did the
It's
girls
Florida in
love it?
July. And are these things on?
Yes. Yeah, people can hear us, but. Well, they might pull the things. Really important things to the kids enjoy it.
I think they appreciated it.
Good.
Sure, they enjoyed some moments more than others. But
I feel like that is any vacation.
Can you guys hear us?
My wife is pregnant, so we did that.
yeah, it's just more expensive trip.
Can you guys hear us now?
But I would also say this is the time we need to prepare.
Yes.
Very interesting. I would say, November is a good time to go.
Says
Oh,
it's-
did you bring your pipe wrench? You may need it.
I think so. I'm not sure why this isn't. Yeah, I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you.
Not through this.
I can hear you through.
Yeah, the phone? Yeah.
I can hear you through my phone, but I can't hear you.
C wasn't up. So that's why I mentioned it.
But like that microphone there, you hit that and it works because that microphone has an extra.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, I don't know.
Can you guys hear us? Can you hear me? I can hear from IT and ACT. Okay.
Can you hear me, John?
So Todd,
Okay,
you
I
can
can
hear
hear
us now. Perfect.
I can't hear you.
Todd, will you talk into the mic?
He's muted.
So you can hear from IT and ACTV. IT and ACTV, but it can't hear from us on Board of Selectmen here.
How long is your trip to, you taking 10 days, or?
Testing, can you hear me?
Try and hold reliable.
Doesn't make sense why there's...
Check one, check, check. Okay, got it.
Got audio going into the system.
Yeah, and it's coming out through here. Maybe the...
Yep. Can you hear me now?
Todd, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Todd, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Maybe the...
That's audio well.
Can you hear us, Todd?
I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. They're asking me to see if they hear me, but
Can you guys hear Board of Selectmen talking right now? Yeah. Can you guys hear us? Well, this is a new version of GoToMeeting that they rolled out. It's newer than the one we used in the past, and I think we're having issues with it.
He did reboot.
Yeah, I already tried.
I wasn't paying
Yeah.
It's strange because we're getting audio out. And the microphone is here, but we have it turned down because it will feed back. Can anybody hear me? Now it sees the microphone. It already does. Elgato microphone. Yep. Can you hear us? Is it on that end? Is it? Testing, testing.
So they can hear when IT.
Testing, 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 testing. This mic isn't registering anything.
Fair.
This mic isn't registering.
And this is the audio from our system coming into the device. This is the headphone audio from this coming out into our system.
Yeah, well, the microphone.
Does the mic have to be on?
No, it's just this that controls it.
Check. Check one.
Right. That's.
Check one. Check. Yeah, we got it. We got audio coming into this. So audio is going into the machine. So it's just check one. Check. Check. Check one. Check. Check. Test one. Test. That is. Check one. Check. Check one. Check. Check. Put down. Microphone, check one. Can anybody hear us? Check one, check.
Oh, yeah, no, I got nothing on that.
It sees our microphone. It sees it here. It says it's using it.
Yeah. That seems like something I could manage.
It's the only default device. Testing, testing, testing. Well, it'll still come out those speakers. He will just talk to this mic.
Okay.
That should do it. If that doesn't do it, then testing, testing.
Just disconnect our system, have it go directly to the microphone that's built into this.
Can you guys hear us now?
They can.
Yes.
Okay, and we can hear you, so we can commence.
So unplug this and let's get this out.
I just, oh, that's,
Oh,
that.
Complaint, I would read that again.
The whole,
Yeah.
okay. So we're gonna start from the top. Good evening, everyone. This is the August 14th Board of Selectmen meeting. This open meeting of the Town of Auburn of the Board of Selectmen is being conducted both in person and remotely, consistent with Chapter 107 of the Acts of 2022, which suspends the requirement of the open meeting laws to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed to participate remotely as long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. For the public to join the meeting remotely by telephone, dial 1-408-650-3123, access code 235-235-861. Or the public can join via computer at global.gotomeeting.com/join/235-235-861. All supporting materials that have been provided to the members of this body are available on the town's website. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. Please note that this meeting is being recorded by Auburn Cable Television. We do have a member that is remote today, so all votes will be taken by a roll call vote. Please allow me to check and see if all members are present. When I call your name, can you please respond? Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. Chambers?
Here.
Ms. Kavanaugh?
Here.
Mr. Corain?
Here.
Great. We have no public comments today, so we're going to move into public hearings. We have a flammable storage license at the Swanson Road Intermediate School. I would need a motion to open the hearing.
So moved. Second.
And a roll call vote. Mr. Corain?
Yes.
Ms. Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Mr. Chambers?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
And the chair is a yes. Is the,
Applicant, Madam Chair, applicant is not required to come. We did hold this over from the last meeting.
oh no, this is the propane.
Oh, that's correct. Sorry.
Yes.
I'm here.
Oh, perfect. So can you tell us a little bit about the propane storage?
Yes, ma'am. I definitely will. I am Myron Trujillo.
We lost him. Oh, sorry.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. This particular school moved a oil tank for 1,000 underground propane tanks.
Do board members have any questions?
is speaking?
My name is Myron Trujillo.
What is this individual's role?
Ma'am,
All right, through the chair, what is this individual's role? Is he an employee of the school department coming to tell us about this?
Were you able to hear her question, sir?
no ma'am. Can you please repeat that?
Gotcha. What is your role? Are you a member of the school, or are you?
Owner of the
I am the
company?
propane provider.
Sir, can you repeat that again?
Yes, I am the propane provider.
Okay.
Okay,
I'm the vendor.
thank you.
No problem.
Are there any other questions? Okay, so we would need a motion to close the hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Through a roll call vote, Mr. Corain,
Yes.
Ms. Kavanaugh,
Yes?
Mr. Chambers,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
and the chair is a yes. We would need a motion to approve or deny the license.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve the license for flammables storage at 10 Swanson Road, Auburn, Massachusetts.
Second.
Through a roll call vote, Mr. Corain,
Yes.
Ms. Kavanaugh,
Yes.
Mr. Chambers,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
and the chair is a yes as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have no communications. For the select board general items, we have a drain layer license. This is the one that we held over from the last meeting. I think we have some confirmation in our packet that the applicant doesn't need to appear, but we do need to have them verified by the sewer superintendent, and that should be included in the packet as well. Does anybody have any questions? Does anybody have a motion?
I'd make a motion that we approve the license, provided that all applicable requirements of the state and town and any of its departments, boards, and commissions have been fulfilled. Said license is subject to all conditions stated upon it. Failure to comply with any and all conditions shall invalidate the license and render it null and void.
Is there a
Second.
second? Okay. Through a roll call vote, Mr. Corain,
Yes.
Ms. Kavanaugh,
Yes?
Mr. Chambers,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
and the chair is a yes as well. Yes.
Can we leave up some of the items?
Absolutely.
Madam Chair, I would make a motion that we move up town manager items 6A, 6B, 6C, 6D, 6E, 6F, 6G, and 6H.
Is there a second?
Aye. Second.
Were you guys able to hear that? We're moving up items 6A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. Through a roll call vote, Mr. Corain,
Yes.
Ms. Kavanaugh,
Yes.
Mr. Chambers,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
and the chair is a yes as well. So I will hand it over to Mr. Kazanovich for,
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'd like to call up the chief, Chief Lovin, and Deputy Chief Scott Mills to address the police department items. And if you have any questions of them, they'd be happy to answer them. So 6A, we have a request by the police department to declare 2 police cruisers as surplus property. These cruisers, once voted, will be auctioned off with other items throughout town. That money will then go into surplus revenue, is a general fund revenue on the police department side. So car 17 with 108,000 miles, 2006 Ford Explorer, and car 52, 2014 Ford Explorer with 122,000 miles, is being asked to be voted as surplus purchase.
Do board members have any questions?
Are you gonna replace these, or have they already been replaced?
They've already been replaced. Welcome.
Mr. Crane, were you able to hear that? Mr. Chambers asked if they were going to be replaced or if they have already been replaced, and Chief Lemon indicated that they have already been replaced.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I can just ask a general question. Where do the funds for the cruisers go after they've been auctioned?
So if there's a sale of property under the police department general fund revenue, it closes out to what we call E&D at year end, excess and deficiency.
So they don't get to keep the money for future purchases or anything like that?
In some cases, all depending on the vendor, they'll take a trade. In these circumstances, there wasn't a trade involved.
Is there a way that they can keep the money? Is there a process we can put in place for future sales of equipment for departments so that they can offset any capital needs or tangential needs they might have?
So this is not going to yield much in terms of revenue, probably 2,500-ish for each vehicle. Department of Revenue is pretty clear that this has to be recorded as general fund revenue.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Madam Chair, I make a motion that we declare Auburn Cruiser Car 17 and Cruiser Car 52 as surplus to discard them through the established practice.
Second.
There's a motion and a second through roll call vote. Mr. Corain?
Yes.
Ms. Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Mr. Chambers?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
And the chair is a yes as well. So moving on to 6B.
Madam Chair, the next three, item B, C, and D, is a request of the board to apply for and accept grant funds as identified in each, and I will turn it over to the police department to describe what it is they are requesting and applying for. So the first one is road safety grant for $18,886.98.
So we've been applying for and receiving funds for this for years, and this particular grant, we do mobilizations as guided by the state, and they include you drink, you drive, you lose. They include crosswalk safety enforcement. They include distracted driving enforcement, and that's what that grant basically entails. That's the Reader's Digest version of it.
Do we have a motion?
So moved. Do you have?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. So for 6B, is there a motion?
I make a motion that the committee vote to authorize, accept, and expend grant funds from the Municipal Safety Grant for fiscal year '24 in the amount of $18,886.98.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second through a roll call vote. Mr. Corain?
Yes.
Ms. Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Mr. Chambers?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
And the chair is a yes as well. Is there a motion for 6C? Or do you want to say something about 6C?
So I'm going to defer to my deputy chief on this. He is my very talented grant writer and has been very successful, both in this rank and other ranks. And I'll defer to Deputy Chief Mills. He worked very hard on this grant. Yes.
Thank you. The body camera grant we applied for, the funds were available starting at the end, or they opened up this solicitation at the end of June, and it was due at the end of July 31st to be specific. We requested $93,945. We expect to hear back from the Office of Grants and Research before the end of the month, and we hope to implement the program by the start of January of '24. We were able to, through the assistance of a town resident who was formerly involved in state government at a higher level, get a decent quote on the newest available camera from Motorola, so we're pretty excited about that potentially. As far as ongoing costs or future costs, there's still a $34,000 to $37,000 a year cost for the duration of the 5-year contract if we end up entering into a 5-year contract with Motorola. And that's essentially just for the cloud storage. The grant doesn't pay for, it only pays for equipment, not the actual storage of the videos. So we're hoping to hear back, like I said, I hope within another week or so.
Are there any questions by board members?
So you,
Madam Chair, I have a couple.
Yes, Mr. Crane.
Thank you. For you, to the chief and deputy chief, I'm very happy to see the town moving in this direction, especially since it not only protects the public, but protects the officers as well. 2 questions. One, has the town adopted or thought about any procedures you have to put in place to deal with Freedom of Information Act requests or public records requests? I know other municipalities that have adopted cameras for police officers are become inundated with those types of requests for all stops, etc. The other question is similar to what other communities have had. I just wanted to know if the use of these cameras is going to create an impact bargaining situation with the police union.
Thank you, Mr. Crane. Great questions. Obviously, we'll take the second one first. Obviously, it's a change in working conditions for the unions, and the process for the impact bargaining has started through the town and Labor Council. And as it pertains to the first, we have already implemented the policy, or the policy's been agreed upon by all the people involved. We ran it through the town, through the Labor Council as well, to get his feelings on it. And there were a few changes, but very minor. And as it pertains to the Freedom of Information Act requests, all of the retention periods that are suggested by, or were suggested by the task force that was created to work on body cameras through post, we implemented those into the policy. As far as how it's going to impact the work that's being done at the police department, it remains to be seen. We anticipate that obviously the FOIAs will increase, and the rule of thumb is generally for every 40 cameras that you need about a half a person, if that makes any sense, to address all the FOIAs. So we're looking at 45 cameras, so that's something that we wanted to wait and see what the actual impact was going to be before we have any discussions about personnel or adding personnel to address those. So does that answer the question, sir? Yes, no, maybe. I can't really see him. Sorry. Oh.
On the other side.
Madam Chair, if I may just add something to that. In order to qualify for eligibility under the EOPS grant for $93,000 and change, we had to show evidence that a policy was being developed and adopted, and 2, that we commenced and began discussions with the bargaining groups who this impacts. So both of those are currently, the policy has been reviewed for legality purposes by town council. Like the deputy said, a few tweaks were made to that policy. They did an outstanding job in putting that together. But more importantly, we reached out to the unions, and we're trying to schedule a meeting as early as this week to begin impact discussions with them.
Through the chair, I'd just like to add that with the policy development, we have had our eyes since I've taken over, and Deputy Chief Mills has assisted me with moving towards certification and accreditation, and the policy that was written for the body worns were certainly written so it would be a certified and an accredited policy in the state of Massachusetts.
Madam Chair, a question. Could you repeat the amount that you said would be the annual cost for these?
The first year, it's approximately $37,000. After that, it drops down to around $34,000. We plan on, putting forth a warrant article in the fall town meeting to address those. We have to get the actual number once we see where the grant what's left over after the grant. But for an unknown, or a reason unknown to me, the grant doesn't provide for, they won't pay for the storage. They'll only pay for on-site storage, not cloud storage. And mostly everybody goes with the cloud storage because it's easier, I guess.
Okay, thank you. And my other question, what's the lifespan of these cameras?
The agreement, they can last as long as, obviously the 5-year contract, but there's an agreement within the contract or within the proposal that we get an automatic replacement or upgrade if one is so available every 30 months. So 2.5 years, so.
Can you explain the importance and why you feel the need for the department to have these? How important it is for you and what you hope to achieve with this program?
I think the bottom line is with the body wants, it's transparency. It's transparency on both parts. It's transparency with the public. It's transparency with the officers, what they're actually doing out there. I can tell you, I've been a policeman for a long time, and with Auburn almost 30 years, and I was part of it when we moved video into the new police station. And there was definitely some pushback and some concerns amongst the rank and file, what, you don't trust us, and all it did once we put it in place was show our police officers doing the right thing, being professional, courteous, treating any detainees or suspects professionally and courteously, not using excessive force, and this is just taking that one more level down the road to show transparency. And quite frankly, I'm not a fortune teller, but I have a feeling at some point in time, whether it's this state or across the nation, it's going to be a mandate, and I'd rather do it on my own terms. I'd rather do it and pick the technology that best suits the Auburn Police Department. We feel that we have a very good product here. Motorola's not going anywhere, to my knowledge. The contract that they've spelled out is very good. The grant amount that I believe we're going to get is very generous. And that's really it in a nutshell. And a lot of my police officers, I can't speak for all of them because they are about to impact bargain with the town. And a lot of my police officers are looking forward to them because they know it's a blanket of protection for them to show that they're doing the right thing every day when they come to work and having interactions. I think to a degree, I've talked to police officers in other organizations, whether it be Worcester, who began implementing them, or the state police. There was some pushback initially, and now they're all they tell me that they're thrilled to have them because it's doing just that. It's showing them doing the right thing every day when they come to work.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So, as we talk about replacement, obviously we know that your job is dangerous. People aren't always happy to see you, and you might need to get involved in a physical altercation. What would be the procedure for if a camera was damaged? How is that replaced? And how quickly would that be replaced, I guess?
In the grant, we requested 45 cameras, which allows us 3 extra cameras that are they're not attached to anyone, they're not assigned to anyone, so 3 extra cameras in the case of damage or some sort of malfunction. And then within their proposal, they offer, as far as replacing or repairing the camera that goes out, they turn it around in, I think they said 21 days or less. So theoretically, we would hopefully never have more than 3 that would be down at one time, or they would be in process of coming back at least. So, and we felt pretty comfortable with the 30-month replacement, as far as upgrades, automatically upgrade with no extra costs to the contract, so.
The other thought I had was, who will have access to view these? Will that be restricted just to command staff, or?
That's a great question. It's also within the policy of the officers have access to their own. set up the system exactly how you want to set it up, and there'll be between 1 and 3 administrators for the actual account, and then each officer can view their own, but they're not allowed to view other people's video. And there's certain, instances where they would not be allowed to view their video if it was a use of force that rose to a level that, was a higher level, and then, there's other problems or issues surrounding that. But it's restricted only to viewing your own, and then as you move up, sergeants would be able to view their guys but not edit it, and then lieutenants and above would have different access points.
The way I like to think about it, through the chair and the board, is video is really tantamount to when police officers really started out earlier in their career, and there wasn't such technology, and one of the key tools that police officers had was a notepad and a pen, and they were encouraged to take copious notes, and that's what they would do. They would come back to the police station and they'd sit down, whether it was a typewriter or a computer, and they'd draft their reports and then use their notes, and they were required to save those notes because they were all admissible in court. And this is really just that. It's a review of the incident that just went through. So you can imagine an officer going through a stressful call, whether it be an assault call or a robbery or a pursuit or any myriad of things, with adrenaline flowing and all of that. There's nothing better really than a video and some audio to record what happens. And we would be remiss if we didn't allow the officers to look at that and watch it, to document, because it's something that they can't change anyways. It's just a historical recollection of what happened, if that helps.
And the only other, concern, which I think Mr. Crane touched on, Freedom of Information Act, but more so, as we know, people who don't have our best interests at heart might wish to gain access to the system. So I know you don't have an IT person, per se, on your staff. So how is this going to be locked down so that hopefully, you can't 100% guarantee that it's not going to get.
The cloud is, obviously we wouldn't be the state police have the same system as far as the Motorola system. The cloud, from what at least I understand of it, it's a government-sponsored storage space, and it is secure. It's, as far as the guarantee of its security, I guess we have to trust the government to some level, at least to that level. And hacking's always a concern, for anything, whether it's our record system or anything like that. But I feel pretty confident saying that the cloud is a secure system and that we're not going to have any unauthorized access. Definitely not by our officers, but certainly I hope not from the outside either.
And we also have guidance through the district attorney's office as well, besides the company, for editing or cleansing of certain videos, may it be a sexual assault victim or a domestic violence victim or something that would not be appropriate to be released. So we're fortunate to have those backups available for us when there are Freedom of Information requests for copies of the video.
Just two more, sorry. You mentioned your policy. Is that going to be available on your website so that members of the public can review it as far as what the camera policy is, so that they will be aware of what is going on?
Absolutely, we'll put that online, not a problem.
All of our policies would be available to the public, so we can definitely put that online.
And just last, as you mentioned impact bargaining, will there potentially be any costs to the town for additional compensation for police officers for now having this equipment on their person?
Well, the town is in the very beginning stages of impact bargaining, and I would presume that the two unions are going to be looking for some sort of compensation, but it's too early in the talks to know. There are a lot of police departments, as well as the state police, that have already settled their impact bargaining and have received some sort of compensation within their contracts.
So you would say it's customary, so it shouldn't be something that shouldn't be anticipating.
Correct. I will not be surprised if the patrolmen's and the superior officers' unions are looking for some sort of compensation for implementation of this technology, because they're going to agree that it is a change in working conditions.
I don't want you to give away the bargaining strategy, I just had that question, so, thank you.
Through the chair, Mayor. On that cloud storage, is it unlimited volume, or as more video comes in, the price goes up because we need more? And how is that storage?
It's a fixed cost annually. Right now, it's approximately I believe it's $895 per camera, regardless of it's unlimited per camera. So it's quite likely that the chief and I will put a lot less footage on the cloud than, say, like a very active patrol officer, but it's still a flat rate per camera.
Thank you.
Are there any additional questions? I think they covered all of my questions, so do we have a motion?
Madam Chair, before you ask
Certainly.
the motion, Deputy, what was the amount that you verbally conveyed to the board?
$93,945. Is that a different?
You got 93,850. Is it 92,000?
I looked at it this morning. Maybe I mistyped it or something when I sent it to Sharon, but I think it was 93,945.
Can we make the correction on that, 93,945?
I'll make a motion that we vote to authorize, accept, and expend grant funds from the body-worn camera grant through the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security up to $94,000.
Is there a second?
Second.
Through a roll call vote, Mr. Corain?
Yes.
Ms. Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Mr. Chambers?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
And the chair is a yes as well. So we are going to move on to the third grant.
Excuse me, sorry. No? It's just-
To authorize, accept, and expend grant funds from the EOPSS Edward J. Byrne Memorial Justice Assistant Grant Program.
So that particular grant program it's a strictly equipment grant, and they have priority areas. We would probably be applying for, under the technology upgrades, investigative tools, and/or protective gear portion of the grant, looking for K-9 equipment and possibly some cruiser mobile data terminal upgrades. At this point, right now, in the early, well, it's not completely early stages, it's around $15,000, but depending on how many cruiser mobiles we add, I mean, it would increase by in the $6,000 range. So if we do 3 of those, then, you're going to add 18 to it. But it's up to $50,000 total that you're allowed to apply for. We'll be under that $50,000, but obviously, if we have a chance to get extra equipment, I'd like to, or we would like to.
And this is a reoccurring grant that we've been applying for and receiving for probably 30 years, maybe even more than that.
It's actually, if it matters, it's spend-down money that comes through the federal government. It's named after a New York City police officer that was killed on the line of duty, so that's where the program comes from.
Do board members have any questions?
Madam Chair, I just have one question. Since it's only listed as equipment, and it sounds like they're not 100% sure on what they're going to apply for at this point, is it possible to get a list sent to the board on the eventual equipment that they did purchase through this grant?
Absolutely.
Of course. We'd be happy to.
Madam
Thank
Chair,
you.
Just a question to the deputy. Do you have to be specific when applying for the grant monies as to what equipment you're buying, or they allow you 50,000 as long as?
You have to be specific and provide quotes and everything. it's very specific as to which priority area you're applying under, so you have to be able to justify it under that priority area, with a project justification. And
So to Mr. Corain, so when that grant is applied for, we'll know specifically what's being requested.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
Is that a quick question?
Certainly.
Is there any match required?
No.
no match.
Okay, do we have a motion?
I make a motion to vote to authorize, accept, and expend grant funds from the EOPSS Edward J. Byrne Memorial Justice Assistant Grant Program for up to $50,000 for equipment.
Is there a second? Okay. Motion and a second through a roll call vote. Mr. Corain?
Yes?
Ms. Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Mr. Chambers?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
And the chair is a yes. Okay, so we are moving on to 6E, the Pinehurst traffic study findings.
So, Madam Chair, I know the board had made a request for an additional study. That study has been completed. The findings have been presented to the board. And with that, I'll turn it over to the chief and the deputy chief to kind of get into the details of what the findings have shown.
So I had the pleasure of talking with my predecessor, Chief Slucas, over the weekend on a personal matter, and the topic of the speed studies on Pinehurst Street came up, and Chief Slucas told me he had done probably 3 or 4 of them himself on Pinehurst Street. There are a lot of nuances to when you're doing these street studies, these speed and traffic studies, and I'll try to explain a couple of them. One that I didn't realize until actually recently, but the last 2 speed studies that my traffic officer did, Jason Miglianico, who's sharp, and you can see by the quality of his report, he knows what he's doing. We noted that this last speed study, the speeds were significantly slower with this last one. And I asked him what he thought was the reason for that. And one of the speed studies that he did was, I guess you'd call it a blind speed study. Basically, it records the speed but doesn't show the motorist how fast you're going. And the last one that he did was essentially a large flashing sign. So if you're traveling in the direction where the radar unit on the speed sign is taking it, the motorists are naturally slowing down and driving slower. I've told the town manager this. Historically, if we date back to the time in the early 80s, town meeting voted to raise the speed limit from 30 to 40. I don't know why they did it. I was a freshman or a sophomore in high school, and I'm really not sure why they did it. I can speculate why they did it, but I'm not sure. The demographics of the road, it's a wide road. It's got sidewalks on one side. It's a commercial cut-through, no matter how we cut it. It's a road that cuts through to the city of Worcester and the airport. And from when I started here, there's a fair amount of traffic that travel down the road every day, to include commercial vehicles. I know that the state police does bridge enforcement for weight on commercial vehicles at the bridge that's right by the businesses at Rochdale Street, right down there. And I can speculate that moving forward into the decades ahead, it's going to continue to be a commercial cut-through. It's not, and I don't want to be misinterpreted. I've seen some things in social media. If anybody that knows me, I'm a traffic guy. I'm all about quality of life for our citizens. I want people to drive slow. I don't want to see pedestrian accidents. I want it to be a nice, safe community on all of our roadways. I worked very hard on the shared roads grant that last year, before Ms. Jacobson left, with the school department and with DPW, and those speed and radar and school crossing signs are going to be going in hopefully within the next couple of weeks. And I think they're going to make a difference. And they are in critical areas of our town where we have our parks and our schools whether it be Auburn Street or Bryn Mawr Ave or Swanson Road or West Street, that I think is going to make a difference. You can say that lowering the speed limit on any road will make a crash less significant. We could, just to be on the other end of the spectrum, we could say the speed limit on the Mass Pike, 65. People are driving on average up there probably between 75 and 85, and they're high-speed crashes with significant injuries. So what I'll give you is the analytics. We look at it. I've looked at it with my supervisors, and we've done statistics. The crashes that we have happen here in town that are serious are happening on Route 12, and they're happening on Route 20, and they're most prevalent for some strange reason Wednesdays through Sundays after 2 o'clock, and they're intersection accidents. So we're not having pedestrian accidents on Pinehurst Street. We're not having lots of crashes on Pinehurst Street, and people generally seem to be driving respectfully. However, any traffic study that we do, no matter what road, you're going to have your flyers because people speed. I saw a traffic study that we did on a road that was crazy the other day, and there was an 80 on it. But I don't know if it's an ambulance. I don't know if it's a police cruiser, a state police car. I don't know if it's somebody that's just driving dangerously. So we do what we can to be as visible as we can. After I became chief, I made it very clear with my staff that schools and traffic and a couple of other things in communication were very, very important to me, and I want my officers out there and visible and making a difference during the heavy commutes, the mornings and the afternoon commutes, whether it's the night shift finishing up on the 11 to 7 shift, and they're stopping a lot of cars, and they're writing a lot of citations, and they're making arrests, and we're trying to be as effective as we can using the tools and the methods that we have. So I guess I'm not going to make a recommendation if the townspeople, just like they did back in the 80s when I was in high school, voted to raise it from 30 to 40. If the board and the townspeople would like to lower the speed limit, I certainly support what their wishes are. But it's my responsibility to give you the facts that we find.
Do any members have questions?
I do. Largely what you stated, because the previous November was, the average speed was 39, and this is just roughly half that. And I don't think you get a cape when you become a police officer, so we don't expect you to be Superman any more than we expect the firefighters to do the same thing. I mean, you're not going to have 100%. Nobody gets 100%. So in my job, we don't get 100%. So I just guess, and this is not necessarily to you or the police department, but I do know that we're trying to create an atmosphere where people are out on the streets and walking. And I do travel Pinehurst frequently, and I don't see a lot of people walking. I don't see a lot of people crossing the street, but I also don't see a lot of crosswalks. So, again, it's a fairly established neighborhood on both sides of that street, fairly populous. So what can we do to make it safest, understanding that nobody has a crystal ball and we can't prevent anybody from doing the wrong thing, obviously. What can we do to encourage people and make it safer for them? So if it isn't the speed limit, which I spent a good amount of time reading old board minutes, and it was very exciting, and they spent a lot of time on Pinehurst at the time. They also spent a lot of time where the new development wants to go on Perry Place. So if you were to go back and read those minutes from probably the 80s into the 90s, this board spent an inordinate amount of time. I have never in my lifetime seen a board spend that much time on traffic. And yet, there had to be 3 or 4 iterations of the board who were still dealing with those traffic issues. So clearly it's a defined area, as you're saying, where there's a heavy flow of traffic. There was a heavy flow then, there's a heavy flow now. but what can we do to make it safer and make the residents feel as if they can cross the street, they can go visit their neighbor, you know, on Lincoln Street, they can do something on Maywood Street, they can do those things, walk up the hill to Carroll Street. They can do that with relative safety.
Well, Mr. Carpenter, that's a pretty broad question, and I hear you. I believe we all have to have a partnership into this and have some ownership with it, and the DPW engineers can look at that and take your suggestion and see if there would be optimal locations for crosswalks, because I don't know what the regulations are for that, but the police department has certainly been spending a tremendous amount of time down there on that cut-through. But we also have a responsibility to our other roads, too, whether it's we get complaints on Packagug Streets and Manor Road and the cut-through roads. So it's just a matter of visibility, education, and enforcement. You're welcome.
How's the officer doing? I know he was out of commission for a while. Is he back to full strength and?
He's back to full swing.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, so Madam Chair, if I may, I just have a couple questions. I think you started addressing this, but the mic kind of cut out, so I apologize. The devices that were used between the first study and the second study, did you say one of them had the radar feedback display? And which one was that?
That's correct. One of them, I just had this conversation with Officer Miglianico the other day when he gave me this latest iteration of the last speed study. Because if you notice, when you go by the police station, we have our speed sign out, one of the speed signs, one of the several that we have out in front of the police station. And that is gathering data all the time. And we like Pinehurst Street, we did the same thing on Oxford Street, where he can turn the visual display on or off, and the speeds are much higher when it's on. The speeds are much higher when the display is not visible, when the motoring public doesn't see it going by. But you can sit in front of the police station as the cars are going southbound on Route 12, because that's the way it's facing right now, in front of the park, across the street from the Horgan Arena, and you can see the speeds are much lower with that visual display that's on. So I don't recall, and I don't want to speak out of turn on what the last one was that he used, because it's his equipment, but I can certainly find that out for you.
Yeah, so I believe the last one, in reading the report today, was the stalker unit, which is a straight-up traffic recorder, and that's why I was able to capture the northbound and the southbound, whereas it sounds like you used the display board, and I think that, you know, when I looked at the speeds, one of the questions I had for the town manager was the drastic reduction compared to the two reports. We're talking 50th percentile speed dropped to 19 miles per hour between report 1 and report 2. 85th percentile speed dropped 18 miles per hour between report 1 and report 2. And to go to, go to the previous comment with respect to what can be done to make it safe, I think that's a very clear example. Having that engineering designed speed radar display board resulted in a much safer street and a much slower traffic. And I think, you know, when you say the 3 E's, it's engineering, education, and enforcement. I think that's sort of where, at least my time on the board, where I want to go. And I understand, you know, it is not fair, and quite frankly, it's not possible to ask you and your officers to sit on a street 24/7. No amount of enforcement will create a reduction in the safe street on every street, because you just don't have the manpower. So I think we need to start looking at the design of the street, the engineering and the education portion supplemented with the enforcement. And I think that, you know, having that radar speed display out there, I'm grateful that the officer did it that way, because it showed the effect, the positive effect that it can create with speed reduction. I also note that the recommendation by the officer in both reports was that based on the characteristics of Pinehurst Avenue, it is clearly it meets the definition of a thickly settled residential area that should have a statutory speed limit of 30 miles per hour. Instead, we have a posted speed limit that is higher than some sections of Southbridge Street on a residential neighborhood with a sidewalk on one side of the road, where residents, and I'm on Pinehurst almost daily, and where residents are, since we only have a sidewalk on one side of the road, unlike Worcester that has it on both, residents that want to walk on the sidewalk have to cross the lanes of traffic and literally play Frogger, a real life version of Frogger to get there. So I'm glad the reports were done the way they were. They showed the positive effect that having an engineering and technology-based approach combined with the backup of enforcement, and I've seen the officers out on Pinehurst, and having them there and having their presence there certainly has an effect as well. So, I want to thank you for doing both studies, and I want to thank you for the information you provided. I do have a question for Madam Chair, for most likely the town manager. And that is, when I reviewed the legal memo provided from town council, it clearly identified the Board of Selectmen as having jurisdiction over the establishment of speed regulations in conjunction with Mass DOT under Chapter 90, Section 18, which is the posted speed limit. Also with the rescinding of a posted speed limit as well. And town council identified the fact that the speed limit for Pinehurst was entered into the town bylaws by town meeting. And therefore, we would need a vote from town meeting in order to exercise our authority that we are provided, both under the town charter, but also under Mass General Law. So I would like a second opinion from the Attorney General's office as to whether an action taken by town meeting that they did not have the jurisdiction to take somehow precludes us from taking an action that we have the authority and the right to take under Mass General Law, Chapter 90, Section 18, which is a vote to rescind a posted speed limit and return the street back to the statutory speed limit of 30 miles per hour as identified by the officer in both reports.
Mr. Crane, would you have any objections given your request that I ask town council to revisit this opinion as a result of your statement tonight? Before he may reconsider, I don't know. But I would offer him to take a second look at this to see if in fact he still believes this is an action that would be required of town meeting, or whether he would, based upon your opinion, change his opinion.
I have no objection to that. I would just note that in his research, 20 years in the profession that I have, Chapter 90, Section 18 never provided authority to town meeting in any municipality to have that jurisdiction. It's always lied with the boards and commissions that are identified in that section. It has not changed in 20 years that I'm aware of.
So, Mr. Crane, under that citation, Chapter 90, Section 18, is it your belief that the Board of Selectmen have that authority?
Yes, and town council's letter identifies the Board of Selectmen under Chapter 90, Section 18 as being the legal authority to set and rescind speed limits. What he does say is that because town meeting included it in in bylaw revision, I think he said in 2015, that sort of handicapped or handcuffed our hands without a vote by town meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I think now we are going to move to the proposed fire station project. I think we're all set. There's no vote or no.
Another question of Mr. Crane. Because we're under some time constraints, because the warrant is going to be open, I just don't want to miss an opportunity for the town to put something on the town meeting warrant that would allow consideration for town meeting to make that decision. I don't know. I think if town council is of the same opinion, based upon your comments tonight, I think Mr. Crane is seeking another opinion from the AG's office. So I don't want you to miss an opportunity if, in fact, we're not meeting till September, and now the warrant is closed. So do you want to make a motion to send this to the AG if town council is of the same opinion after consulting with him?
I would like to make that motion.
Second.
Through a roll call vote, Mr. Corain.
Yes.
Ms. Kavanagh.
Yes.
Mr. Chambers.
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter.
Yes.
And the chair is a yes as well. Okay, so moving on to 6F, an update on the proposed fire station project.
So, thank you, Madam Chair.
If there's no objections, can we switch F and G to do an update on the public safety radio system while Chief Lemon is here?
Certainly, can I have a motion?
So moved.
Through a roll call vote, Mr. Corain.
Yes.
Ms. Kavanagh.
Yes.
Mr. Chambers.
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter.
Yes.
And the chair is a yes as well.
Thank you. Madam Chair, good evening, members of the board. We're here tonight to just, one of the items is to provide an update on the public safety radio system. And there has been, as town administration will tell you, there has been many, many moving parts over the past 3 weeks on this project. I know that you were made aware about 3 weeks ago that we had an issue on the Rochdale Street site. And just by way of background, I'll just kind of recap that a little bit on what the problem was. On that, if you remember back, we'll say July 16 through 20, we had inches and inches of rain, including Friday, the 21st. On Saturday, July 22nd, we received notification through the system. It tells us when national grid power is lost from the site and when we're on backup power. So we received that notification early on Saturday, the 22nd, that we lost national grid power at the Rochdale Street site. Some personnel went up there to look at the situation, and it was determined, National Grid was called, National Grid came out, and during the exploration of that, when we popped a couple of the manholes to see what was going on, the conduit, the underground conduit that runs from Rochdale Street to the radio tower, that's approximately, 800 to 900 feet off of the road, there was water pouring out of the end of the conduit. So the conduit, somewhere between, and again, it's hard to tell because when you pop those, it's pouring out in several different locations, so it's hard to tell exactly where it was breached. But the underground conduit was compromised, somehow. So National Grid would not turn the power back on to that for obvious reasons, which means we were on generator power. I don't want to get into, because there's so much. If the board is interested in learning more of the high level, the way that the system operates, or some of the challenges, we would be more than happy to review that. But honestly, for the sake of time, it is so much, as town administration will tell you. There's just so much that sort of compounded this situation. One of the problems that we ran into early on was the backup generator failed after a period of time because the metal Connex box that it sits in, the generator overheated and it would not run. So through the generosity of the Mass State Police, we had a loaner generator for a period of time because we needed a special type of generator to run that. We have generators, backup generators, but in order to run that radio equipment, This generator actually came from the communications department of the state police. So we operated that generator for a period of time. We're 3 weeks into this, and the main radio site at this point is still on generator power. We have run many cost-benefit analysis on how do we fix this power problem, but every turn we make, there's a little hurdle that we have to jump over. The most being that we do not own as much of the land as we thought we did when this radio tower was erected almost 20 years ago. We knew that we had an easement to pass over from Rochdale Street on the road that goes up to where the police firing range is, as well as our radio tower. We were all under the impression, though, that we didn't own like the first 30 feet, so we needed that easement. Well, come to find out, we don't even own the road. So there are some issues in terms of creating a new conduit run on property that's not ours. But even if we were to do that, the cost to do that, we've received some estimates. We actually went out to bid, and we received some estimates, and we're somewhere in the neighborhood of about $250,000 to create a new road, because we can't dig along the property that the existing conduit runs. So in order to create a new road from property that we own a little further down Rochdale Street, but again, we're going somewhere between 800 and 900 feet, between the road construction and the electrical, we're looking at about $250,000. Now, when we do the cost benefit and say, okay, if we construct a road and we do the electricity for $250,000, we can actually create a new site for less money than that. As the board may be aware, the fire department is in the process right now of a radio system upgrade that was on CIP 3 years ago. We've kind of started this project. One of the first questions that was asked when we were doing our radio design was, and Rochdale Street is referred to as Crowell Hill. That's how the site is known. One of the first questions that the radio consultants asked was, what is the future of Crowell Hill? Are we using that as the main site, or are we looking to do something else? Again, the answer for me was pretty quick, because we didn't want to invest money in creating a new site. So I said, we're going to keep Crowell Hill, knowing that Crowell Hill isn't necessarily the best site, but it's the site we have. So we were going to design a system around that. When we were now faced with possibly doing a $250,000 road and electrical project, it only made sense that as part of this redesign, that we look to potentially abandon Crowell Hill as a radio site and then construct a new location somewhere else for less money than the $250,000 that it was going to cost. We've been working with our radio consultants over the past several weeks. There has had to be a lot of equipment moved around in order to get our primary and secondary. The primary fire equipment is at Crowell Hill. The police's secondary equipment is at Crowell Hill. So as of today, all of the fire department equipment has been moved off of Crowell Hill, and we're now running on another location, another site. And tomorrow, the plan is to move police have 2 backup systems. One of the police backup systems was moved today. They're anticipating the second backup system is going to be moved to another site tomorrow, and it's expected by Wednesday Crowell Hill will be decommissioned. Now, it's decommissioned at this point because there's no power. But the question that the town is faced with at this point, and we're trying to get another meeting scheduled at the end of this week with our radio consultants and all the players involved, the question is, what's going to be the long-term future of Crowell Hill? And at this point, in our minds, that answer is pretty simple. It's kind of pointless for us to invest $250,000 into a site that isn't the best site to begin with, when we have an option to move the site to another piece of town-owned land that will serve us much greater from a coverage capacity. So there's a ton of moving parts with this, but I at least wanted to give you, in some respects, a high-level overview of what's been going on. The radio system is up and running. The remainder of this week, more so on the police side, they'll be spending a lot of times retuning some of the microwave dishes that point in certain directions to make sure that that's fine-tuned. That will continue throughout the week. But sort of the good thing is we've been trying to get off generator power as quick as possible, because when you're on generator power, not only is that, it's tough to have that secondary, but we run the risk of actually damaging and burning out what is really high-tech computer equipment when you're running off of a generator that doesn't really have that kind of consistent flow, in terms of juice. So we've been working really hard over the last 3 weeks, trying to come up with a plan to get off generator power, and it's not as easy as I thought it was going to be. There's been a lot of work that's gone into this. I want to thank Deputy Chief Johnson. That first week, I happened to be on, this happened on the 22nd. I left for vacation on the 23rd. And I think he literally, all he focused on that main week was just trying to get the police and fire radio system up and running on generator power with the consultants. And then by the time I came back a week later, we were talking about moving a road and moving a site. I'm like, wow, things moved fast, in a week. But there was a lot of moving parts, 4 or 5 different plans a day for that week, kind of leading up to this. So where are we going from here? So this Friday, we met with the town manager and the assistant town manager this morning. As I mentioned, we're trying to pull a meeting together later this week. We're going to have to go before town meeting this fall for some type of an ask, but I don't know what that ask is right now. We're going to pull that together more, because one of the other, I'll say, problem, for the lack of a better term right now, is that what we're trying to balance is that we were building out a system, and I had equipment that was delivered to build out our system, but some of that equipment has somewhat been robbed to fix this problem right now. So we need to kind of put our heads around what equipment has been used from our radio build out for this temporary repair. And at the end of the day, when we invest a portion of money, either for a new site or some tech upgrades or whatever, what is that total going to look like? Because what we're faced with is that we could spend some money on some temporary fixes right now that at the end of the day, we would wind up spending more money than if we were to just say, yes, that's what we want to do as the permanent solution, and just do it now. Even though it may not have necessarily been planned for right now, the situation that we find ourselves in, we don't want to see us spend more money on a temporary fix where we could just say, yes, let's move forward with that, and it's going to cost us less money. So our architects, our system architects right now are, and they've been fantastic through this, they're working on what that system is going to sort of look like, and then kind of point the boat in that direction, which will ultimately give us a number on what we're going to ask for at the fall town meeting in order to sort of just once and for all, just put all the pieces together. So, there were some things that were, like I said, were not planned in a police build-out, or they weren't planned in the fire build-out, but the fact that Crowell Hill is coming offline, and the fact that the board, in some respects, authorized $500,000 in ARPA money to build the public safety fiber network. Really, what we've just done here is roll a grenade into the room, and we've kind of blown up the whole plan. But in reality, we're able to kind of put it back together that at the end of the day, I think it's going to give us a stronger system than what we had before this started. So certainly entertain any questions that anybody has. Like I said, I'm trying to give you the Reader's Digest version without getting too technical or complicated, but.
Do board members have any questions?
Madam Chair, I do, but if anyone there has questions, I can wait.
Go ahead.
So for the chiefs, through you to the chiefs, I respect the fact that you want to spend money wisely for the long term. I just want to make sure that in the short term, our officers, particularly the police officers, have radio coverage when they leave their cruisers. They're responding to a call. And likewise, that our fire department, when they're responding to a call, a fire or an ambulance, and they're away from the apparatus, that they have radio coverage as well, just to ensure that they are protected at all times. The second question is probably more toward to the town manager. In case town meeting does not have the desire to expend the funds for the radio, do we have ARPA funds available that could be used for that?
So, Mr. Corain, I would say that this is a high priority in terms of public safety for our personnel. I would, if town meeting opts not to support a request that we bring forward, I would bring in a request to ARPA and ask the board to approve it under those federal funds. We just received a report on our HVAC study. It does make a recommendation for 3 sites as to what would be best suitable for those sites, although that recommendation does not come with a cost. Based upon the recommendation that they're making to purchase efficiency equipment for those facilities, we would have to go out to bid. That cost probably is not going to be known for some time. But I would say that this is definitely a more of a priority than the HVAC, and I would make that recommendation if town meeting should not support a request at the fall town meeting.
So through the chair, that's a great question, Mr. Corain. So that's what Chief Coleman and myself and our deputies were concerned about right out of the gate. It was a catastrophic failure of our primary site. My primary site, my repeater site, is Crowell Hill, Rochdale Street. My secondary site, repeater 2, is at the Leicester Street water tanks. So, got the generators in place, we came up with a plan. We're moving, I'll back up a little bit. So, concerned that we may have another catastrophic failure of our system, we reached out to our state police partners and state police communications section, which we have a very strong relationship with. And we have police radios and fire radios that are capable of using the statewide system. So on the police side, we were able to get assigned a digital event channel that we have as a backup that we've already tested and utilized throughout various parts of the town. It had not the best coverage, but it had very good coverage. And we can adapt and modify if we have to, if we're forced to use the state police frequency. But right now, we're utilizing our own internal systems, and there's a plan in place for our not permanent but temporary fix, and we should have better answers probably by the next time the board meets as to how that temporary system is working, if that answers your questions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Mr. Crane, I think we all want to be reassured that the Band-Aid approach that keeps things humming along has some short-term stability that will allow us then to go out and pick the best site for the long-term solution. And we're probably not going to know that. We're trying to pull a meeting together for the tail end of this week that hopefully is going to give us some information and some data that will allow us to prepare a warrant article for town meeting. But I think this short-term solution is a temporary fix. I think it does bring some stability to communications in the short term, but certainly we have to look at the big picture and make a commitment to a long-term fix.
Are there any other questions? Thank you so much for the update.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
We're going to go back to 6F. The update on the proposed fire station project.
Thank you. So, as you all remember, the last time Chief Lemon and I were here together, The board gave direction to remove the police portion of the public safety project and to move forward with a fire station-only project. A few days after that meeting, since then, I've had a couple of lengthy conversations with our architects, just to kind of give them, sort of a high overview of what we're looking to do. They're pulling some cost estimates together. They've kind of given me, I'm not prepared to say those publicly, but they've given me some ballparks on what they think the total of this may be. But there's still a couple of unanswered questions that we need answered. So I'm not prepared to say that tonight. But one of the things, I guess, one of the conversations that I think we need to have tonight, and the board needs to set some direction, revolves around the committee. Let's talk about the committee first. So the Public Safety Facilities Advisory Committee that was established 5 years ago was given a certain charge, and that was to evaluate sites, make a recommendation on a joint facility, all of those things. To date, they have accomplished their charge. They presented their report to the board. The board has taken action on that, but the action that the board has taken is different from that recommendation, which is fine, but we find ourselves at the moment sort of with this question of, we got this committee hanging out there. What are they doing? Are they still the committee? So my recommendation tonight is that the board look to disband the current Facility Advisory Committee, because their charge is complete, and then establish a building committee that we could work with in order to kind of pull all the information together and then be ready to present something for next May at the meeting. We have had some people calling town hall sort of since this has been talked about, asking how they could get on a building committee. So we know that there's some interest in the public to do that, but it is going to require board action to determine what you want to do with the existing committee and then possibly create a new committee that we could work with to kind of ultimately bring something to town meeting.
Do board members have any questions?
I mean, technically speaking, we would be giving direction to the manager, because the board was robbed of its ability to create committees in the charter review. So I personally think that was a foolish decision on behalf of the 2010 charter, among other things that they did. But that's a personal opinion. So I certainly don't have any problem going with that recommendation. They have been serving for a long term. I'm sure many of them would like a reprieve from having to carry the ball down the field even further. So, I mean, I'm happy to follow that and make a motion that we give direction to the manager that he disband the existing police station study committee, or public safety study committee, whatever it's called. We have to get better on naming committees. Short, brief names. The building committee, and create a new building committee to focus on the next steps and prepare for a Maytown meeting action.
Is there a second? Oh, sorry.
Madam Chair, just a comment or two. Technically, I don't even think I have to disband the committee because I think their terms have already been expired. So that being the case, there are no active members. They would have to get sworn in and extend their term. I think if we just let that run out and advertise for a new committee with a new charge, I think that would serve our purpose.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll just keep my motion.
That's fine.
Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Through a roll call vote, Mr. Corain?
Yes.
Ms. Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Mr. Chambers?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
And the chair is a yes as well.
Madam Chair, just one more thing relative to this update is, 5 years ago, when the $150,000 was authorized to hire, ultimately, who wound up being Tecton Architects, that money has been expended over the last 5 years through that study. So we will be putting an article before the town meeting to appropriate a new sum of money. It won't be $150,000 because that original scope involved looking at sites. There was a much, evaluating facilities. All of that stuff is done. So that ask isn't going to be $150,000, but I am waiting for Tecton to give me an estimate on what the cost will be, essentially, to do conceptual designs on the West Street site. So that will be an article that will be put forward to town meeting this October. Less. Yeah.
Don't bury the lead.
Oh,
That's the headline.
Less.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I believe H is our last one that was moved up, and that is an update on impact shifts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, as you are aware, 6 months ago, the board authorized a 6-month extension of the impact shifts for the fire rescue department. So those shifts are set to expire at the end of this month. We have just about enough money to carry us to the end of August with maybe about $1,000 left over. So one of the questions, Mr. Carpenter had actually reached out and just asked, the status on the impact shifts. Actually, thank you, because it prompted it to come to this tonight. But sort of, Mr. Carpenter asked a question that was really, what's the status of the impact shift? But I provided him with a much lengthier explanation, and he was kind enough to write back and say, that's all great information, but essentially I was just looking for what the status is. But I want to recap what I said to Mr. Carpenter in that message when it came to the impact shift was, as you know, with the hiring of the 4 firefighters this past January, that allowed us to bring the groups from 9 to 10 people per shift with a minimum of 8. So we were able to set the minimum at 8. With the impact shifts, the way that we have designed those, it essentially has given us, when we're running at our minimum of 8, and then we have the impact shift, we've been running at 9 consistently. That has been night and day in the operation. And I've said this, you've heard me say this before publicly. One person doesn't seem like a lot, but when it allows you the opportunity to have a supervisor in a car or not, or a third firefighter on the engine instead of 2, that all means something in the bigger scheme of things. So the impact shifts have been very, very beneficial in order, it really essentially allowing us to run at 9 consistently, even though our minimum has been 8. So as I said to Mr. Carpenter in that email, that I'm sort of torn. As you all know, I'm usually not shy coming and asking for things, but I'm really kind of torn on this one because I think the board has been extremely generous over the last year and a half appropriating money for this shift. And as much as I would love to say tonight, I'm asking you to re-up another $150,000, I recognize that there are other things that the board has identified in terms of what you would like to do with ARPA, and one of them was just raised again tonight. I mean, if town meeting ultimately says no on an ask for the public safety radio system, we may need to go to ARPA. So I'm hesitant to ask because I know that there are other things. Would I love if a board member said, we'd like to give you another $150,000 for 6 months? I'm not going to say no, because the value of that 9th person, like I said, it's night and day. It really does make an impact. But if the board chooses not to extend that, I completely understand, and I thank you for the generosity that you've extended us over the last year and a half to do that. Now, with that said, again, as you know, we're waiting to hear on a SAFER grant for 8 positions. I'm comfortable in saying tonight that I think us receiving that SAFER grant is highly unlikely. They're extremely competitive. More municipalities have put in applications this year than any other year previously. So the likelihood that we will be successful on that grant, it's slim to none. So with that said, you know, my plan in talking with town administration, and I know we have to wait to see how a few things check out, but it would be my intention to ask town administration and the board once again to do what we did last year, which was place an article on town meeting warrant to amend our budget to allow us to hire 4 more firefighters on January 1st in order for us to move from 10 to 11, which would then allow us to reset our minimum from 8 to 9, and then we're sort of right back in the same boat where we are today with those impact shifts. A little graph just was passed around to you, and I just want to talk about this for a quick second, just to reiterate. It's all things that you've heard me say before, but this is a 20-year snapshot of our call volume versus our staffing going back to 2002. And you'll see from 2002 to 2005, we were operating with 5 people per shift. We went up to 7 for a couple of years. And then when we got to 8 people in 2008, we went 13 years operating with 8 people per shift, which really translated to minimum of 6. So again, we were really, for those 13 years, hovering around 6 to 7 on average, not the 8. And you can just see from 2002 that our call volume has just steadily been increasing over that 20 years, with a good 13-year period where our shift staffing stayed at a minimum of 6. And only until 2021, when we went to 9, were we able to move the minimum staffing from 6 to 7. And then just this year in 2023, we were able to move the minimum staffing to 8. And then with those impact shifts, we've really been operating at 9. So in reality, when you look at it sort of from our perspective, having over the last year operating with a minimum of 9 because of the impact shift, 8 plus the 1, in all reality, we've kind of increased the operation by 3, because what we've known for the better part of 13 years was really a minimum of 6 to 7. So going from even 6 to 9 or 7 to 9, it's really kind of 2 additional bodies, and that's been really the game changer. So I point this out just for, again, that conversation of I just want to make sure that we're continuing to make sure that our staffing is consistent with our increases in call volume, because there was a large period of time where those moves weren't being made. And again, there are reasons, right? There's been growth in every department. I'm the first one to say I've given things up so the police and the schools can have some things, and the schools have given stuff up so we can have some things. I get it. There's only so much in the pot. So that's not a negative to why we are where we are. I'm just trying to raise the issue that we just need to be very cautious that we don't go another 13 years keeping pace with what the staff should be based on our current call volume. So that will be my ask in October for the board to consider putting on an additional 4 members for a half year in January. But as far as the impact shifts go, I don't have an ask tonight. But I will leave that up to the board just based on the information that I provided, if you have some direction that you would like to take.
Do any board members have questions?
And I know we've talked about it privately. My great concern that we're going to outpace the ability for the taxpayer to actually supply officers to both departments to the degree that the chiefs, whoever they may be at the time, are in place. And I know we just added some staff, and the last 13 years, I don't think anybody had a lot of fun with the budgets that were going on, and we understand the reason why. And we certainly aren't in a great financial situation currently, but that is just my concern, is that as your call volume continues to escalate, we're going to outpace the ability for the taxpayer to absorb the cost. I've been looking at houses recently, and I saw this tiny little, not even 900 square feet, on 8,200 square feet, and the town is taxing them at over $4,000. And I just wonder where that's going to end. So I don't know that I can commit, but I'm glad that you brought it up tonight about the 4, so that we can think about it and we can have conversations offline about this. Because obviously you always make a strong argument for why you need them. So it's not a matter of this is a luxury you're asking for something because just because. I mean, I don't think anybody in town with a straight face would say that. But that's just my general concern. And now that I've testified, what's the solution if we don't continue the impact shifts? So greater reliance on mutual aid, things of that nature, or, because obviously the calls don't go away just because the staff person doesn't. And kind of a secondary question to that is, what is the condition of the staff? Because they're running at a pretty high level just under normal operations, and for the last 3 years, we've been asking a lot of people, not just in public safety as we know, but what is the status of those individuals, and how much longer can we ask this of them? I guess that's my other part of the question is, I don't want to put anybody in an early grave, and I think just with your normal work level, you're already operating at a fairly high tension rate. So adding these extra shifts, what is that doing with the overall?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I'll take the mutual aid one first. I don't anticipate that lack of impact shifts on the surface is going to move the mutual aid number at all. What drives a lot of the mutual aid number is, you'll see on the right-hand side of that graph that I pointed, I made it in very, very small print, just to make you kind of work for it. Very, very small print. 43.7% of our total call volume continues to be overlapping calls. If you recall, when MRI came in, a few years ago and presented the report, and we talked about that section on overlapping calls, they actually pointed out that that's a very high number. It's probably one of the higher numbers that they've seen in municipalities of our size and demographic. That is what drives the mutual aid number. When you have 3 to 4 calls going on simultaneously, we could have 13 people on duty. There's still only a certain amount of trucks, that are available to go. So the overlapping calls drives the mutual aid number. Where the impact comes from the impact shift is, it's really the determination of 2 factors. It's whether or not we have a supervisor in the shift commander vehicle that is able to cover some of those overlapping calls awaiting mutual aid, or to have just a stronger command presence on the emergency scene to organize, or it means the difference between a 3-person engine and a 2-person engine. That's the difference with, and the major, I guess, impact for the impact shift. It's not really a mutual aid factor. The multiple calls is what drives the mutual aid. I mean, we had a day last week, I think we had mutual aid ambulances in town, I think 5 or 6 times in one particular day, because our trucks were just continually running. So that number, again, is driven by the overlapping. The other part, I guess, to your question was, the burnout factor. They're tired. I mean, I don't want to kind of paint this bleak picture, but it's, when you're running 15 to 16 emergency calls in a 24-hour period, again, some of those are hours long, some of those are a little shorter in duration, right? It's that old analogy that many hands make light work. So when you have, 2 people that are responding to the majority of those calls, it's a long, kind of thing. So the more people a shift, it gives greater rotation opportunity to be off the ambulance today and on the engine, or, so yeah, the more people you have on a shift and the higher the minimum gets, we're able to have a better distribution of the workload in terms of, what districts people are responding to and how many calls are responding to. We haven't had any issues filling the impact shifts. To your point, and I know you've mentioned this a couple of times and appreciate your comments on it, employees are not forced to work the impact shifts. We have some employees that if they didn't work a lick of overtime, they're okay with that. That's not, it's not what they want to do. And we have other employees that work more overtime and some in between, it kind of ranges. But the impact shifts are filled every day, but we are not forcing. And actually, that was a point that I brought up in the email. One of the things that has been nice is that our minimum is 8. We've been, with the impact shift, we've been going to 9. But if for some reason someone calls out, we've been using the impact shift to be able to drop to the minimum, which means we haven't had to order somebody to work or offer other overtime. Whereas normally, if there were 8 people scheduled to work and somebody called in sick, we have to either authorize overtime or order on overtime. On those occasions, we've been using the impact shift to fill the minimum, which means less overtime. So that's another benefit that we've kind of been able to enjoy with that impact shift, is it's given us a little more flexibility on the minimum when someone calls in.
I know we talked about it previously, the cost for the 4 officers. Do you remember that number, and has it increased greatly since we authorized the other?
So they'll be getting a 2% cost of living raise. Their contract is structured a little differently, so their COLAs are coming in January over the life of their contract instead of July. So on January 1st, they'll receive a 2% COLA. But I believe last year's ask was roughly $150,000 for the half year. I wouldn't expect, it'll go up by about the value of that 2%, but I would throw out that it's that ask for the half a year starting on January 1 would still roughly be about $150,000. So it's a total of $300 to bring 4 on for a full fiscal year.
And then you mentioned you don't expect to get the SAFER grant. Do they inform you that they're done, or it's open-ended and you just...
No, there's awards going on right now. I mean, listen, I could get a phone call next week and I'd be absolutely thrilled if I did, to say that we're getting awarded. And I don't like the way that the federal government does it, because communities like Auburn are competing with the city of Baltimore and the city of Los Angeles. And there are a lot of depressed cities in the country right now. And a lot of the awards, I'm seeing some of these awards go to, to bigger cities to hire 30, 40 people at a time because, they have, retirements and attrition rates of things that they're down 200 positions, or something like that. I really wish that they would break it up and you're competing with like communities. So the fact that we're competing with every fire rescue department, from a small municipality with 1,000 people to those with 1.4 million, it makes it difficult. In talking with our grant advisors through FEMA, there's nothing that we can do to make a stronger application. Our application is solid. It's a strong application. But our demographic and just sort of where we sit, it doesn't tip that scale to say, we're going to give you $1 million, to fund these positions for 3 years, not with who we're competing
Stop
against.
funding you, would you be in a better position?
We wouldn't, unfortunately.
So that won't help, okay. Thank you.
We're going to continue to try. We will file another one next year. We'll always continue to try, but I try to be as honest as I can just to say that I'm not hopeful, and that's unfortunate.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, Madam Chair, if I may,
Absolutely.
through you to the chief, and I don't expect you to have necessarily the answers to all these questions tonight, but perhaps next time you come before us on this issue, you will. The first, you probably do have, for those of us that weren't on the board, can you just tell us what an impact shift is? The other question is that, are there national standards as it relates to minimum staffing on apparatus, as well as the impacts of not meeting that minimum standard when it comes to both impacts on property with respect to fire response time, and even more importantly, impacts to the safety of the firefighters as they respond to emergencies? While I appreciate the concern of the ability of the taxpayers to meet the growing needs of the fire department, a bigger concern, I think, would be the protection of our property and ensuring that, that our property is protected and that our personnel are protected as well. So I just want to know if there's national standards, are we meeting them? If not, what's needed to meet them? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Corain. Those are good questions, and I do happen to have, I think, 95% of the answers that you're looking for. So the impact shifts came about 2 years ago, post-COVID, again, as a response to our increasing call volume. And originally, the intent was to put on a third ambulance during our peak times, which was 9 in the morning until 6 at night, where you see a significant increase in the call volume. So the first round of impact shifts that were approved was to hire 2 firefighter EMTs on overtime in order to staff the ambulance 6 days a week. We went Monday through Saturday because, again, it was all data driven. Sunday historically is a slower day, by maybe a half a dozen calls, but the data is what the data is. And the reality, it was less money to do 6 days instead of 7 over the course. So the vote and the pitch was 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday, 9 to 6. And that allowed us to staff a third ambulance during the day for that time. So we did that for a year, and it certainly was a benefit. I think what we learned at the end of that year was that instead of having 2 people on that 9 to 6, operationally it made more sense to just create that as one position on a 24 to basically bring the staffing from 8 to 9. And that's what we've been doing the last 6 months. So 6 months ago, sometime in February, so it was right before the election, sometime in February, that money ran out, so we came before the board, and the board authorized a 6-month extension of those impact shifts. But we structured it a little differently in this last round than we did the first year, like I said, where we did 2 people just during those daytime hours. So we added it just as a full 24-hour shift. So it's 2 people, but it's technically 1 position for the full 24, and operationally that has worked much sounder for us than what we did in that first year. So it's been a year and a half since we've been working with those impact shifts, and that money is set to expire at the end of this month. So that's why this is on the agenda tonight, to see if there's a desire from the board to extend it another 6 months. And I would say this, that if the board was to extend it tonight for another 6 months, and we were able to get 4 additional firefighters in January, I would consider that to be the end of the impact shifts. That would be it. Because if we were able to go from 10 to 11 a group and reset the minimum at 9, that's where we are today. So if the board was to extend this for another 6 months, well, 5 months at this point, by the time it happens, for another 5 months, and we were successful in getting those 4 other positions, that would be the end of the impact shifts as far as I'm concerned. So the other questions, the answer to your question, Mr. Corain, is yes, there are national standards for staffing fire apparatus, and that is 4. But I will say this. I would love to be at 4 people on an engine, all the time. Even if we got to our ideal staffing, we're still, for the most part, going to be running 3 an engine. So if we had 3 at headquarters, 3 at West Street, 2 on the ambulances with a supervisor, I'd be thrilled with that. NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association, they set those standards. They are recommendations. They are not law. So if something were to happen, catastrophic, and there was an investigation, it would automatically, whether it's a fatality or a serious injury, it would trigger an investigation by what's called NIOSH. It's the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. And you have to remember that Massachusetts is now an OSHA state within the last couple of years, and NIOSH is a subdivision of OSHA. They would come in, they would evaluate the incident, and they would create a report, and they would make recommendations. And one of the things, let's say that on that particular night there happened to be 2 firefighters on an engine, that would be called out in the report that there was insufficient staffing on the engine. And again, is it something we're going to get a fine for? Is it something, no. But they're recommendations for a reason. I'd love to have 4 people on an engine, but I'm also a realist, and 3 would be fantastic. It's like anything. You have to kind of consider it, pick a sports analogy. Whether it's football or baseball, you have position players. It's the same thing on a fire or a medical call. There's position players, and if you're missing people, someone has to fill that gap. It doesn't mean that the position is gone. So it's really, and I could send the board some links if you like. There are many, many studies, and we've run some of these studies internal, and I'll point you to one in a moment. But there's documented studies that show the effectiveness of a 2-person engine versus a 3-person engine versus a 4-person engine. And for every additional person that's on that engine, up to 4 people, your efficiency increases. The reality is that 4 people can do more in those initial minutes than 2 people can. And OSHA, and the fact that we are an OSHA state now, we've always somewhat had to, adhere to it, but it's even more important now, is OSHA has a regulation, which is law, is that it's what's called the 2-in, 2-out rule. So in order for firefighters to operate in what's called an IDLH area that's immediately dangerous to life and health, so if I send 2 firefighters into a building, I have to have 2 firefighters on the outside to effect a rescue in the event that something were to happen to them. So if you're only running 3 people on an engine, and that engine shows up and it's the only people that are showing up, we're not compliant with 2-in and 2-out. Now, providing more people are working, and if we're able to send an engine and an ambulance to that call, okay, I can make my 2-in, 2-out with another person or with the ambulance crew. So it's constantly a game, it's chess, not checkers. But we're constantly moving the pieces around to try to fit the need. So the short answer is no, there's not a specific law, but there are standards, and in the event that something happens, we will be held accountable to those standards. There is a report that is, there's a white paper report that we wrote maybe about 8 years ago, that I authored, that's on our website, and there's a subsequent video on our YouTube channel on Auburn Mass Fire, if you go to YouTube, and it's effective staffing of emergency medical services. And what we did was we did a time-lapsed study, and we showed just on a routine chest pain call, the effectiveness of 2 people responding, 3 people responding, and 4 people responding. And because again, whether you have 2 or 4 people responding, all of the work that needs to be done as we're treating people in houses, what we showed in that video was that we cut the time in half by having 4 people respond to that call versus 2 people respond to that call. And we were pulling out of the driveway close to 17 minutes after arrival. Going to the hospital with 2 people, we were pulling out of the driveway in 6 minutes with 4 people, right? So it's a very good demonstration on the effectiveness of, right? And it's sort of that old adage question, it's a lot of people ask that question, why does a fire engine respond to medical calls or whatever? It's about the amount of things that need to be done. EMS has progressed over the last 30 to 40 years. Our people are not ambulance drivers. They're not just pulling up, throwing you in the truck and driving as fast as they can to the hospital. We're bringing the emergency room to you. And the way that our treatment protocols are written is even for cardiac arrest, we could be in your home up to 20 minutes before we're even moving, because we're providing all of the same interventions that are done in the emergency room, from drugs to cardiac monitoring to electricity to airway. The best chance of survival that you have is in that time period where we're in your home, not throwing you in the ambulance and driving really fast to the hospital. But again, in order to do that and to be effective at it, it's a labor-intensive process. You need people to do that. I hope that answered your question, Mr. Crane.
It does. Thank you, Chief. Just 2 follow-ups. One to the town manager. Is it, given that the impact shift is due to expire at the end of this month, and we are not likely to meet again until September, and given what the chiefs indicated in terms of the competing demands for the ARPA funds, which we all know, is it possible to extend the impact through the end of October, which will get us to the end of town meeting and will let us know whether town meeting funded the radio request or whether we need to use ARPA money for that? That will at least allow us, given everything the chief just said, to keep the best possible at this time amount of people on shift, at least through town meeting. And then the second question through the chair to the chief is it correct to say, based on what you just said with respect to the amount of your peak areas for call volume, which was I believe you said 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Saturday, that corresponds largely when the business community is most active in the town with respect to not necessarily residential demand, but commercial and business demand that might increase, be the potential source of the increase in the number of calls that come in during that time.
So if I could answer the first question, Mr. Corain. I don't know what the value of the impact shifts would be if it's extended till the end of October. Certainly, we can calculate that number, and if it's the desire of the board, and certainly we can have an administrative discussion relative to what the financial impact is going to be on ARPA. The board would have another swing at that ball if we should pull a meeting together before the money dries up, and that would be probably the latter part of August or the beginning of September. We'd have to do some analysis on that to see exactly when that would run out, but it would give the board an opportunity to consider that before the money dries up.
Through the chair. Mr. Corain, the second part of your question was, The hours are actually longer than that. It's really kind of like the busy time frame from a data perspective is like 7 in the morning to like 9 at night. The reason that we landed on 9 to 6 was when the ARPA shifts, when the impact shifts were first proposed, Deputy Chief Johnson actually gave a few different scenarios to choose from. And what we were really trying to balance was we were trying to be fiscally responsible in the sense that we weren't asking for $500,000 to give us from 7 in the morning to 9 at night, whatever. We kind of landed on something that was reasonable, which again is why we went 6 days a week. We kind of picked that 9 to 6 because we wanted to try to keep it around $300,000, which is what we did. That was what the first appropriation is. To answer your question, yeah, correct. I mean, the morning commute, starts around 6:30, 7 in the morning. I can tell you statistically, I can tell you, you can set your watch to it. The shift ends at 8 a.m. is when the new firefighters are coming in. The firefighters that had worked the previous 24 hours are coming off shift. Every day, within 7 in the morning till 8 in the morning, we are good for 2 to 3 calls within that 1 hour period between 7 and 8. So every day, someone's not getting out on time. It's just a roll of the dice as to who that is. But the real hours, when you look at it in terms of like heavy volume, it goes for about a 14 and a half hour period through about 9, 10 o'clock at night when many of the businesses are closing down and things like that.
Through the chair, Chief Coleman, how much money are you looking for from ARPA?
Be about $70,000 if you were to go to town meeting in October from the beginning of September.
All right, what would it be, before the, forget about the town meeting extra, what would it be just until, until January 1st? Yeah, so we're talking September, October, November, so 4.5 months, or actually 4 months, right?
It was 150 for 6.
Yeah, so 150 for 6 puts it at about 25 a month, right?
Looking at the calculator.
That's okay. So 150,000 for 6 months puts it about 25 a month, roughly?
Deputy, is that 70,000 continuing to add one person to the 24-hour shift, or does that revert back to the impact period of time?
the one person.
Through the chair. So, Chief, you said you weren't going to come in and ask for it because of everything that happened, but you gave us conflicting information. If we were to not approve the impact fund to extend beyond what we already did as a board, you're going to operate as well as you can, and you're going to go ahead and present to town meeting, and you're going to be looking for those 4 officers anyway. So if you're going to be looking for at least $100,000 for the next few months and then $300,000 for next year, or again, you're going to ask for it in January, but then start the shifts in June, is that what you'd be doing, or?
So if, and again, I apologize if I'm giving conflicting information. What I'm saying is that I'm not coming in and asking for money tonight. I've communicated to the board the value of the shifts, the predicament that we'll be in if they're not funded. And if the board sees the value and chooses to do that for any period of time between now and the first of the year, it would be greatly appreciated. But if it's not done, I understand, but I understand that we're trying to balance a bigger picture here. So I'm not coming in with an ask, but like I said, if the board sees the value and they want to do that, we're grateful. If we go to the town meeting and amend the budget for 4 more positions, starting on January 1, we would immediately start the recruitment process to have people hired for a January 1 start date, which is what we just did this last year. Right after town meeting, approved that budget amendment, we went right into the hiring process, and the new employees started on January 2nd.
So, I'd like to make a motion that we not approve the impact shift until January, or we can reconsider in January, depending on what town meeting.
Is there a second?
We'll do a second for discussion. And my comment earlier about the taxes was more, we need to come up with a broader strategy of how to fund government. I'm looking at Chapter 90, which has been flat, and costs have gone nothing but up. And the great and general court has not increased that. So I understand that they have limited resources as well, but it's a lot bigger than 17,000 people. So I think there needs to be a wider discussion as we go forward with how do we fund this? It's not a, hey, you know, you're taking an awful big bite out of people's wallets. That's not the purpose of my comment. It is, we are fast coming to a point, and I do remember when Governor Patrick made the pledge that we were not going to fund government, or we're not going to use property taxes as the basis for government, town government. And we now are 2 people past that, and we're still in the same over-reliance on something that is a regressive tax. We have an aging population, and we certainly aren't seeing at the federal side Social Security increasing at a rate that's acceptable, while we see every other cost increasing on that side. So not just for those of us who are working, but for those of us who have put in the hard hours and shouldn't have to worry. So my comment shouldn't be taken as, oh gosh, you're horrible people, that you're asking, that any town employee is horrible for even asking for a paycheck. We do need to start having a conversation about how we're going to fund these things, because the communities we're talking about, we have a affordability crisis. There seems to be a huge disconnect between our elected officials, what they say and what they do, which is they say we have an affordability crisis, but yet they don't provide the resources necessary to protect those things. So I think as elected officials, we might need to become a little more involved in the space as well. And I know both of your organizations, I'm sure, are on Beacon Hill and Capitol Hill any number of times in a given year trying to get that across. And I certainly am not pointing the finger at anybody per se, but I mean, I just don't see how we can continue to assault a single homeowner while we're also assaulting them on the tax side, on the income tax side. I mean, there's only so much money that an individual has. So my comment is more for a wider conversation, not for any sort of pejorative comment, but I seem to be testifying. You know, I only ran for a 1-year term. I'm going to have to give somebody else my soapbox. But I am in favor of doing it for the next couple of months, because I really do feel like, you know, selfishly, I have a parent at home who has benefited greatly from having fire department. And when I tell you that they're there within a matter of 3 minutes, I think that's probably cheating them by half a minute. So I do think that these are necessary services to our public. And because we have such a high distribution of elders, not that any of us can't fall and break our necks, but we know that the statistics show that people, as we get older, our balance is off and other things. So I will support giving you money through the end of October, and then let's see what town meeting would like to do, because I do think it's valuable. But I do just want to say that I do want to be very mindful of the impact we're putting on those individuals who are doing it, even though they're doing it voluntarily, and their families, because I know that that's a heck of a long time to be away from their loved ones, and that puts a lot of strain on the family as well. So I will withdraw my second for discussion purposes.
Madam Chair, I have a question. through you, please, to the chief. So if the money isn't extended tonight, taken from the ARPA funds and given to the fire department, do those individuals get laid off at the end of the month?
No, there's no layoff situation. The ARPA funds,
Oh, it's just overtime?
it's overtime.
I get you, okay, thank you.
It's overtime. So it does not impact the total department complement.
So, Madam Chair, I would make a motion that we grant a sum of money to be determined and, send it to the board to fund impacts through October 31st. Let's see what town meeting does. We might want to give the manager and the finance committee time to see if there are other funds that they can support these programs so that we're not necessarily hitting ARPA for the whole amount. So that's why I'm kind of suggesting an incremental approach.
Madam Chair, I'll second that motion.
Okay, through a roll call vote, Mr. Corain?
Yes.
Ms. Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Mr. Chambers?
No.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
And the chair is a yes, so that passed. Do we need to set a specific amount, or do you?
I would suggest we got a vote of the board that allows us to continue this till the end of October. Let us pull together a cost summary, and we can bring it to you at your first meeting in September and ask for a formal vote then.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to the board. I think that was everything for us,
Go
right?
to.
Thank
One more question, I'm
Yeah.
joking.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
So I think now we're moving back to Agenda 5B. Is that correct? Just wanted to make sure I'm not off.
Madam Chair, can I make a motion that we take a 5-minute recess?
Shouldn't it be 5A? Did we do the drain layer license? Okay, thank you.
I'll second that motion.
So through a vote, Mr. Corain for a 5-minute recess? Wait, we'll get back to Todd. Ms. Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Mr. Chambers?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. Corain?
Yes.
And the chair is a yes as well.
I just need a minute to have a mental refresh, guys.
That's fair.
I felt bad. They were crucified.
If there are other avenues to fund it, why would we fund it through ARPA?
Yes, for 5 minutes. I'm sorry.
No, and look, I think we need
All right, we are ready to resume. We are starting with Select Board General Item B, with the vote on the 2023 Fall Town Meeting. We need to set the date, open the warrant. So I believe the town is proposing the date is Tuesday, October 24th at 6 PM.
Madam Chair, I make a motion that we vote to set the fall town meeting on Tuesday, October the 24th at 6 PM.
Second.
Do a roll call vote. Mr. Corain?
Yes.
Ms. Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Mr. Chambers?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
And the chair is a yes. The second motion we're looking for is to open the warrant.
So moved.
Second.
Do a roll call vote. Mr. Corain?
Yes.
Ms. Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Mr. Chambers?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
And the chair is a yes.
I have a question on the next one.
Sure, the final vote is to close the warrant for Friday, September 8th. Is there any questions?
So, is there a reason, so we come back from the holiday and that ends, do you need that much time between it, or can it be extended to the 15th? I don't know what goes on in that closed window, but just thinking coming off the Labor Day.
So I think that's going to be, if we extend it beyond the 8th, it's going to be tight, because we have to have warrant reviewed by town council. We have to assemble all those warrant articles. We have to go to the finance committee. We have to bring it back before the board for recommendations.
There are several votes we take as a board. So they submit them, then we send them to council, say, for whatever, review for legal perfection. And then we post it.
And if it's closed out on the 8th and there are a number of requests, we have to prioritize those. We have to see how much available funds we have that we can make a recommendation on funding for those articles. So there's a lot that has to be done within that.
And I'm just asking, I think generally speaking, we had one thing come up and I asked how much time you need, and you said about 2 weeks. But that's why I asked about this, but I understand there's more work on the back end. I have no issues with the date. I just wanted to clarify, because, between the 24th and, the 8th and October 24th, it seems like a lot of time, but.
So for the most part, we notify departments well in advance of your vote. We're saying this is a recommendation we're bringing. So they're formulating their warrant articles now, even before the board takes any action. So they do get a jump in advance of the vote.
Thank you.
I make a motion that we vote to close the warrant for fall town meeting on Friday, September 8th, 2023 at noon, 1 o'clock?
That would be 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock.
Close of business on Friday.
Okay.
I'll second.
Through a roll call vote, Mr. Corain?
Yes.
Ms. Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Mr. Chambers?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
And the chair is a yes as well. So now we are moving on to 5C. There's a citizen's petition for a street acceptance for Whitman Bailey Drive. We're looking for a vote to refer to the planning board for comment and the town engineer for review. I think included in your packets, there's a citizen's request. Does anybody have any questions?
So we were wondering earlier, what was the process? I mean, if this will go to town meeting, and will it be on the warrant regardless of what the town engineer says?
So regardless of the position of various boards and committees, this will be on the town meeting warrant for the fall. Typically, it goes to the planning board for their comments and review to find out whether or not the developer is satisfied all of the requirements is stipulated on the site plan approval, and then it goes through a hearing process.
Okay, thank you.
It's not typical for, and this is a fairly new road, for a resident to apply for approval. Is there, or can we get the reason why the developer isn't bringing this forward for acceptance?
I don't know. I'm certainly sure that's going to be part of the discussion when it's before the planning board. But a citizen's petition doesn't stipulate or indicate why the developer hadn't brought this forward.
No, I would just like to know, and I think the board should know why the developer isn't doing something, because we are going to be asked to take a position on this, and it would be important for us to know why it is that the developer is wanting to hold on to this road, or perhaps they've abandoned it, I don't know, but
We will check with the town planner to see if they have any information that we can share with the board.
having said
So,
that,
Madam Chair, through you to the town administrator,
Yes.
do we have any indication at this point from town staff that this road was constructed to town standards with respect to materials, sidewalk, utilities, et cetera?
This was just presented to us. We haven't had an opportunity to do a review with our town planner to verify whether or not all of the conditions, and I'm sure this roadway had to be built to a standard acceptable to our bylaw, as well as our requirements is stipulated by the town engineer.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, I'd make a motion that we refer the request to the planning board for comments and to the town engineer for review and a potential vote to schedule the street layout hearing.
Second.
Through a roll call vote, Mr. Crane?
Yes.
Ms. Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Mr. Chambers?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
And the chair is a yes as well. Moving along, we have no proclamations or recognitions, we have no gift acceptances, so I believe that puts us on 6I, the update on Chapter 90 funding from the town manager.
Madam Chair, members of the board, I just wanted to inform the board that we received communication from our delegation on the current year FY '24 Chapter 90 distribution that Auburn is expected to receive, and that came in late July. That's $606,057.28. We believe this amount has been recently signed by the governor. So based upon that level of distribution, which is basically level funded from the current fiscal year, that we will bring in a priority list as established by the town engineer on what roads will be paved or reconstructed as a result of that level of funding.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I just ask one question?
Of course.
Is it possible on that priority list for the engineer to also include whether they will be reconstructing any sidewalks that are on those streets or constructing new sidewalks on those streets should they not exist today?
Sure, Mr. Crane, we can ask the DPW director to provide that to us as well.
Thank you.
Moving along, there's a notice of meeting for the Housing Production Plan Committee, Community Workshop, Monday, September 18th at 6 p.m.
Madam Chair, I just want to add something to that. We conducted a survey. We've been told that 200-plus individuals participated in that survey. That survey, I believe, is about to come to a close, leading up to a community workshop where those results will be presented, and we're asking for community input as a result of those findings. Likewise, the hazard mitigation plan, we're planning a workshop for Monday, August 28th, 2023 at 6 p.m. in the Select Board Room. Both of these meetings will be, one is already posted on the website, one will be posted tomorrow on the website as a result of the board's approval. We ask the public to participate in these workshops. We value our residents' opinion, and certainly it would be beneficial to receive that type of feedback from our citizens.
Thank you. Do board members have any questions? Okay, so moving along to 6L, the Finance Committee vacancies.
So, Madam Chair, members of the board, in your packet, there are 2 applications that we provided to you in advance of tonight's meeting. We also received a third most recently that has that been provided to the board, Sharon? Yes. That third one, the one you received tonight, is an applicant from Precinct 4, which is one precinct that we are seeking to fill. The other seat can be done from any precinct, so we're asking for your consideration in setting up interviews at your September meeting.
So we would need a vote to set up the interviews. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion that we set up interviews for Monday, September 11th, 2023, and that any applicants that come in after are considered and scheduled. I will not be here on the 11th, and I will not be available to be here remotely.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Through a roll call vote, Mr. Corinne?
Yes.
Ms. Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Mr. Chambers?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
And the chair is a yes as well. Moving along to item number 7, we have no tabled items. Item number 8, we have a member item, request for information on summer positions, senior and veteran tax programs, and summer camp enrollment.
So, thank you. In summary, I just want to highlight the information that has been provided to you. In terms of seasonal help, we have a combination of 9 part-time employees at the golf course. We have 17 recreational, full-time and part-time employees supporting summer camps and other recreational activities. And we have 3 seasonal help in both parks and cemetery combined. In terms of the senior and veterans work-off program, I had a discussion and verified with our senior center director that for the current fiscal year, we have 3 individuals, one working in the town clerk's office, one working in the assessor's office, and one working at the COA. The period of time that these individuals are working under the work-off program is between November 1st and October 31st. They're working a total of 100 hours at $10 per hour for a total abatement consideration gross of $1,000. How that stacks up against last year, we had 4, so we're down 1. So we're currently doing some outreach through our website, through the newsletter at the senior center, and through some pamphlets through our outreach program to try to solicit other individuals to participate in our work-off program. In FY '22, we had a total of 6. So the numbers are going down despite our efforts to try to get more people involved in the work-off program. In terms of our veterans tax programs, we currently have 0. We had 1 working on behalf of a veteran who was unable to work, so the spouse was working. That veteran recently passed away, and as a result of that, that individual no longer qualifies to work on behalf of their spouse. So we continue to try to get individuals involved in all of our work-off programs, but despite our efforts, disappointingly, we've seen the numbers come down. So we're going to continue to make some efforts to build those numbers up. So, Mr. Carpenter, I hope that answers any questions you may have. If you should require any additional information, be happy to provide that to you.
Okay.
Madam Chair, can I ask one question?
Yes, absolutely.
Related to this, through you to the town manager. When we met with the assessors to discuss these various tax programs recently, I'd asked a question that they were not sure of, and I didn't know if you were able to get an answer or if you could get an answer for the next board meeting. Similar to the veterans work-off where they allow others to work on behalf of the veteran, it was unclear on whether the senior center allowed a volunteer to work on behalf of an elderly resident as well. And I didn't know if you were able to get an answer on that or not. Thank you.
I do recall that discussion. Let me check the eligibility requirements as it relates to the senior work-off program. So let me just check with the senior center director tomorrow, and I can get that information to the board for your next meeting.
Great. Thank you so much.
So these, to qualify for the program, are these or limits, are they set by the town, or is that a state thing? Is it tied to, like?
I believe it's tied to a certain percentage of,
I forget the poverty rate. So they have an income, and I believe that is set through the federal and state.
Yeah, I believe these limits are set by the town based upon income limits. But let me verify that with MGL.
Yeah, if we could clarify that, I mean, they're low, which I can't imagine people being able to afford to live with these incomes. So I don't know how many people are eligible, and that's why, like, is it an eligibility thing? Because, again, if you're married, 40,000 a year, if you're collecting Social Security even, I would imagine it's higher than that.
Yeah, I think it's tied to the income limits that is determined for 41C statutory exemptions. It follows that same model. But there may be an exception to that, but let me look into that.
Okay.
What I can also tell you is town meeting voted to set the limit at 15, not to exceed $15,000. So that's how we come up with the $1,000 per individual with a limit of 15, so.
And then the $10 per hour, again, I know minimum wage is higher. I don't know, this is obviously circumvents that, but is that also one of the limiting factors is someone can get a job, or maybe they're eligible to get a job and not, make a little bit more?
So we do have some flexibility in determining the hourly rate that's gonna drive the number of hours that gets up to the 1,000. We understand. I mean, I know minimum wage is going up. We may want to consider offering a higher hourly rate, which is going to diminish the number of hours, but it may be more enticing at a higher rate of pay since we're only getting 3 per year.
Those are things I'm looking for, if that can help engagement. And again, I don't know how many people are eligible based on those limits, so, I mean, if we're trying to get 100 people and no one's eligible, then we're really not doing a service for anyone. So, thank you.
I have one question. Can you verify with the delegation, the governor's budget actually did increase the amount of those statutory, not the income limits, just the amount? Can we verify whether that was put in the final budget?
Sure.
Thank you.
Finally attached in your packet, we have meeting minutes. Are there any corrections or changes to these minutes? Hearing none, we'll accept these meeting minutes. And finally, we just need a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
The final roll call vote today, Mr. Corain?
Yes.
Ms. Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Mr. Chambers?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
And the chair is a yes as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.